education, then you're not going to have educated action, blah, blah, blah. But it's important to get results, too, which is what we're all about. So it also had to be something that was cheap, no special materials, no proprietary technology, no big thing on the reef, something that can be easily duplicated. And that's really key. We have to be able to train, duplicate ourselves into a lot of different areas. And we're working on that. We're going into Colombia next week to start one. Not Colombia, South Carolina, it's Colombia, South America. We hope to go into Bonaire later in the year. So we just, it's got to be easy. It's got to look good. Those are some of the criteria. It's project, their process has to accomplish all those. So we kind of make our own little frag plugs. We make our own little places to grow them. Our nursery's out in the middle of the sand. All these corals were grown on these little plugs. You can kind of see the numbers there. The numbers denote the genotype and the fragment number. Every coral in the nursery, and there's about 7,500, is tagged. So we know where it came from. We know how many, whether it's third, fourth, fifth generation, and we kind of know everything about it. We're doing a lot on line nurseries now, which is kind of our new thing. We hang the corals on a little piece of, usually a wire. There's a little tag on there, and it's hung on like a clothesline. Ed sat in the boat wiring those a couple weeks ago, and it's cool. And the corals grow faster there. They grow bigger. They're healthier. They're less maintenance. It's like the new thing. We probably have 2,500 corals growing on lines now, and they're just growing like weeds. Yes, sir.
How did you discover that line method?
Well, I kind of stole it from somebody, just like I stole all this stuff. But stealing it, and then I read a paper, and I talked to a guy that was doing it. He had done it in, I think, the Dominican Republic, and then there was a guy doing it in Jamaica, and they were making these line nurseries. And I said, well, first all I could think of was all the reasons why it wouldn't work. And I said, oh, well, it's, blah, 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 blah. And then I said, well, you stupid idiot, if they're having luck, why don't you try it? So we tried it, and yeah, it works great. Now, we have another new and improved thing that's going to come out in 2 or 3 weeks. We're putting out a paper. We're trying to protect ourselves, so we can't really talk about it yet, but it's going to blow all these things away. And this is like the tropical fish industries, the 25 3-centimeter fragments. After 2 years, we could cut them into 150 fragments, and after 3 years, that one fragment could be producing up to 750 fragments. That's hanging on the line. Now, if we were doing it on a disc on the ground, it would probably be more like this number, or even, well, probably more like that number. So, it's huge. Yeah, the implication is huge. If we just get one fragment from every different genotype that we could find, in 3 years we're going to be buried in coral. And, nobody's ever had that problem down there, but we're there. So today we have about 7,500 corals at the nursery. It's all laid out in rows. Now, this is what we call the disc nursery, because everything is growing on a little, like a fragged plug. We're getting away from this, but it's still organized that way. We've put about 1,000 corals out on the reef, and we've about 25 different reef sites. And if you look down the rows, every row is a different genotype. The corals on this row are genetically different than the corals on that row, or the corals on that row. And we have about, 90 different genotypes right now. It's pretty cool. When the corals are about a year old, these are all about a year old, we take them out on the reef. They're all tagged, and the tags indicate the color of the tag is a genotype, and then there's all kinds of numbers on there, and they all mean something. Yep.
The previous slide, what depth is that?
The nursery is in 30 feet of water, which is where our live rock farm is. I got some pictures off the internet I was going to show you. We're on the, as seen in outer space now. You can see our nursery on Google Earth now. You can see the rows of live rock, and you can almost see the rows of coral. So, it's a big thing out there. And yeah, it's 30 feet of water, and that's where we started the live rock farm, which is kind of like...
How far offshore is it?
It's 3.1 miles. Now, in the ocean side of Florida Keys, from shore to 3 miles is state waters, and so you have to, the state of Florida owns that water. From 3 miles out is federal waters. In our case, the state of Florida, during the aquaculture program, trying to get a permit, we applied for one in state waters, we applied for one in federal waters. Two entirely different processes. We didn't think we were going to get either one of them. We ended up getting both, and we were the first one on both of them. But so it's 3 miles offshore, so it's not it's a long swim, but it's also the zone where you would have staghorn coral. If I had put my live rock, a mile offshore, I would have never had staghorn settle, and I wouldn't be in this business. I would be still a tropical fish collector doing my thing, and there would be no aquaculture program doing this, because the scientists would have to do it, and if the scientists were doing it, they'd have to study it more, and there's always more questions to ask and more research to do, and no actual doing it. So I'm the do it kind of guy, not a study it forever. So anyway, and we have stumbled through, and we've watched what the aquarium people are doing. You guys are, I am an aquarist, and you guys are part of this, whether you know it or not. And the inspiration I got came from, that type of stuff. So, the whole restoration stuff, I mean, we're constantly improving and reinventing what we've done in the past. So anyway, getting back to this, we take these corals out on the reef. We have this new epoxy. It's not the gun stuff, and it's not Julian stuff. It's another type of epoxy, but we epoxy them down on the reef in very specific locations, clustered in groups of different genotypes. Ed, you've seen this before. Sorry. But I'm excited about it. Okay, this coral was planted in July of 2007. Just planted right there. Same coral, same shot. This is about 6 months later, 5 months later. You can see it's grown quite a bit. Oops. That's after a year. So this little guy, somebody talking to me? So this little guy was a nubbin that big, 2 years ago, and then at a year it was planted on the reef. After 2 years, or a year on the reef, looked like that. Year and a half and 2 years. And so this little tiny nubbin is that big in 2 years, or 3 years on the reef. 2 years on the reef, 3 years total, and it started to spawn. Now this funny story on that is this group of high school kids were going to go out and watch the coral spawn, and there was some nearby elkhorn coral that they were going to be collecting eggs from, and they said, well, let's go look at the staghorn coral, and they invited me to go along with them. We're going to take a night dive, we're going to do the coral stuff. Did you want to come along? I said, nah, not really. Well, we're going to look at your corals, and I said, yeah, they're not going to spawn yet. They're going to be 3 or 4, 5 years old before they spawn. I mean, what did I know? Nobody knew how old they had to be, but I just thought they had to be bigger. But sure enough, they spawned that night. So they came back and they said, well, you want to go tomorrow night? We're going to go again tomorrow night. And this is just to give you an idea how you can develop a preconceived notion of what something is and then be totally wrong. So first of all, I thought they're not going to spawn at 2 years. And then they said, well, you want to go out the next night? Oh no, they're only going to spawn once. They only spawn one night. I know all about this stuff. I'm a tropical fish collector. So I said, well, I'll go out anyway. Well, they spawned again the next night, and they spawned the next night. They spawned 4 nights in a row, this coral. And, how was I to know? I mean, who would have known? But it was exciting because this is the first time this coral has ever been cultured in not captivity, but cultured, second, third, fourth generations, planted on the reef, and then have them spawn. So the whole idea of what we're trying to do, it can now be done in 2 years, and it's really exciting. So there was, big national news, and the kids were all excited. So it was cool. And anyway, these are the little coral eggs and bundles of eggs that came up. If anybody's ever seen a mass coral spawning, it's really cool. Is somebody going to pull the hook on me in 8 minutes, or?
No, keep going.
All right, I'm almost done. But not quite. So I've been doing staghorn coral for a few years. We had developed this very successful program. People were copying us. The Nature Conservancy had taken notice, and they were, what are you doing? How can we do more? How can we get involved? So there's a lot of people getting more and more involved. And I kept going back to the sanctuary. I said, I'd like to do elkhorn coral. You know, and I was trying to get funding and, go to this, put in a grant for this, put in a grant for that. And they kept saying, oh, no, nobody's ever done that, and I don't think that can be done, and, there's too many complications, blah, 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 so they never gave me a permit, never gave me any funding. And I finally went to the sanctuary people and I said, look, can I just do it? I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. I said, but I know it can, I know it'll work, and I have an idea. And I had gotten to know the managers really well by then. They said, for you, yeah, we'll let you try it. So I got this kind of an experimental permit to start an elkhorn nursery. It's like, I was totally jazzed. I thought, this is cool stuff. So the permit allowed me to pick up fragments, just pieces laying on the ground, or what we call corals at risk. In this case, this is an old dead elkhorn branch, and it had, well, it's an old, it's a live one, but it's died off. And this part in here is all, it's starting to bio-erode. There's sponges are boring through it. It eventually is just going to fall over. And so all these new growth tips on the end, and they might not be new growth, they're just remnant pieces, they're going to fall off eventually. So I said, look, can we just help them fall off? So if we couldn't find the little fragments on the ground, can we just cut these off like right there? So we went in and we cut them off with a hacksaw, plugged them into these little modules that we had made. Each one is labeled and kind of identifies where the reef that it came from and all that. These are just pieces that we found on the ground for the most part. So this is one that we did in May of 2009, just this little nub. Within how many months? 10 months? It had grown that big. Now that's 3 or 4 times the size of its original thing in 10 months. And our goal was to go along, grow them out and then cut these little ends off like that. That was what we thought we were going to do, and that's what we did do. So we get in there, and you can't see it as well on that, but this is the same coral. It's probably the same day too, because then I took that shot and I cut these branches off right in there, or kind of trimmed it right in there, and mounted them on like our own little frag plug. And we've had basically 99% survival of those frags for the next year and a half or more. And they start to grow up, they start to branch out. That's what we are hoping to do, and we've been able to do it. We've been able to do it successfully and on a pretty big scale. Another little thing that we hadn't anticipated is, what do we do when we find a big old chunk of coral that only has live tissue on some weird spots? So we convinced the sanctuary to let us take this coral in particular. We cut these branches off, cut the dead stuff all off, sealed all the bare stuff with the epoxy, and then we just glued it down to the reef. And we didn't know what we were going to do with it, but we just glued it down. A few months later we said, oh, well, I got this idea. What if we could hack this stuff up into little pieces? So we got a hacksaw with a tile cutting blade, hacked it into little, what we call little caramel. It's like a little piece of caramel. And it's only live on one side. It's just dead tissue, dead skeleton on the rest. And we planted them on these little plugs like that. Didn't know whether that would ever happen. I'll tell you, growing up in the Keys, diving down there all the time, corals are like this sacred object that nobody touches. And here I am, this tropical fish collector, hacking and sawing elkhorn coral up, the most coveted coral of the whole Caribbean. It was weird and it was exciting because I knew that what I was going to do was going to succeed, it was going to turn a lot of heads. And so, anyway, this is just a little, another little thing. We figured out that if you started with a little piece of caramel, after a year you can cut that caramel into 5 pieces. What's that? Anyway, 2 years later you can cut it into 25 pieces, and after a year, after 3 years, that little piece could now have 125 fragments. And so, the point is that, if you do this stuff actively, it doesn't require a lot of wild extraction. You just need a few pieces, and you can turn it into a huge nursery of corals. So this is going to follow this set of corals through about a year and a half. This is May of 2009. Here's January. It's covered the epoxy. It's starting to grow down over the little disc, but not really very exciting. 11 months, still not a lot happening. You can see some kind of rogue little polyps there starting to get a little bit wild around the edges.